My mother always said I'd figure it out eventually. She said it the way people say things they believe, but don't examine too closely, with a kind of warm detachment, like a forecast for someone else's weather. You'll be fine, Zoey. You always land somewhere. She said it when I changed my major the first time, and again the second time. She said it when I left the marketing job after 8 months, for reasons that made sense to me at the time and less sense to everyone around me. She said it during the years when I was still becoming whatever I was going to become, and she said it with the patience of someone who has decided to wait you out, who trusts the destination without following the route. She was not being cruel. That is the part that took me the longest to work through. She meant it as a kind of faith. The faith you extend to someone whose capacity you believe in but whose choices you've stopped trying to understand. The faith that doesn't require knowing what the person is actually doing. What I didn't know, for 10 years, was that she had acted on that faith one Tuesday morning in October. She had picked up the phone. She had made a call that she believed, completely, was the right thing to do. She had done it quietly and practically and without telling me, and then she had gone about the rest of her day. She had canceled my job interview, and I had spent 10 years blaming myself for the outcome. My name is Zoey, and this is the morning that changed. But before I get there, if you're not subscribed yet, consider it. It helps the channel grow and reach more people. I am 33 years old. I am the operations director at TerraLink Logistics, a mid-sized supply chain company outside of Columbus, Ohio. I have a team of 11 people. I have a parking spot with my name on it outside the building, which still produces in me a very small and private sense of absurdity every morning when I walk past it. But I have learned to keep walking. I did not arrive here on a straight line. If you had asked anyone in my family 10 years ago whether I was going to end up managing a department of any kind, most of them would have smiled in a way that meant something other than yes. My father would have said, eventually, which in the Calhoun family was the word we used for, we'll see. My mother would have said, of course, because she was the family diplomat. My sister Chelsea would have said, probably, which from Chelsea was actually close to believing it. Chelsea was fair in a way that made her the outlier. I did not arrive here cleanly. I arrived here with wrong turns and setbacks and a period of about 18 months where I genuinely could not see what direction I was facing. Some of that was my fault. Some of it, it turns out, had help. The help is what this story is about. I need to tell you about Chelsea before I tell you about the interview, because Chelsea is where this story ends, and the ending means something different if you know where she started. Chelsea Calhoun is 3 years younger than me. She is the kind of person who makes plans in September for the following February, who maintains a labeled organizational system in her refrigerator, who has never, not once in 30 years, been late to anything she could control. She is not humorless. She can be genuinely funny, dry in a way that catches you off guard. But she was born with a relationship to consequence that I simply have never had. She understood from a very early age that actions produce outcomes, that outcomes can be predicted, and that the correct approach to life is therefore to predict them and act accordingly. Our parents understood Chelsea intuitively. They understood me with effort and love, and not always accurately. When we were children, Chelsea 9, me 12, I remember my mother once watching us both try to assemble something. I think it was a furniture kit for a toy shelf, and Chelsea read the instructions twice before touching a single piece, laid everything out in the order the diagram showed, and had it done in 40 minutes. I had started building before reading anything, gotten 3/4 of the way through by pure logic, realized I had installed one shelf upside down, and spent the next 20 minutes carefully taking it apart and redoing it. My mother watched this without comment, but I remember the expression on her face when she watched Chelsea's method: recognition, the expression of someone seeing something that made sense to them in a language they already spoke. She looked at me with love. She looked at Chelsea with love and comprehension. I had a habit, in those years, of beginning things with great intensity and then losing the thread. Not from laziness, I was not lazy, but I had a relationship with enthusiasm that outpaced my relationship with follow-through, and the gap between those two things was visible to everyone around me, including me. I would light up about something, a class, a project, a plan, and the lighting up was genuine. And then something would shift, or not shift, or shift wrong, and I would find myself somewhere other than where the enthusiasm had promised. My parents watched this pattern accumulate across years until it had a name in their minds, even if they never used the name to my face. The name was, "We'll see." I am not telling you this to excuse what happened later. I'm telling you because the story only makes sense if you understand how perfectly the wrong explanation fit, how clean it was, how it required nothing from anyone except what they already believed. They were not unkind people, Floyd and Frances Calhoun. I want to be specific about that. My father drove 2 hours through ice once to help me move furniture between apartments. My mother kept a jar of peanut butter crackers in the pantry because they were my favorite, and she restocked it without being asked for years. These are the private acts of love that don't make arguments but are real. Frances could also be funny, sharp, unexpectedly perceptive about people she'd known a long time. There were moments when she and I would catch each other's eye at family dinners over something absurd that nobody else had noticed, and I would think, she sees things. She is not simple. But there is a difference between loving someone and trusting them, and the people in my house trusted Chelsea in a way they never quite trusted me. I hadn't made it easy. I want to be honest about that, too. The record, if you're keeping one. I enrolled in the education program at Ohio State at 18 because I liked children and it seemed practical. I switched to communications at 19 after a professor told me I had instincts, and I wanted to find out what he meant. I graduated in communications, took a job at a marketing firm in Columbus, was reasonably good at it for about 8 months, became unhappy in a way I couldn't explain well to anyone, including myself, and left. Took a job in logistics administration at a small freight company, which sounds sideways, but was actually interesting to me in ways I hadn't expected. Left that one after a year, for reasons that had less to do with the job and more to do with a situation I'm not going to detail here, except to say it was a mess, and it was at least partly my fault. By 24, I was back in my parents' house in Westerville, working part-time at a supply chain software company, doing data entry and some basic analysis, saving money, and trying, in a quiet and deliberate way I had decided not to announce, to get somewhere real. The part I had decided not to announce was important. The announcement would come when there was something to announce. The Summit Group was a consulting firm that specialized in operations and supply chain management. They were hiring for a senior analyst position, a stretch for me on paper. I won't pretend otherwise, but I had spent 4 months making the case for why the stretch was warranted. I had read everything I could find about the company and the role. I had done practice interviews with my friend Priya, who asked me the same questions 11 times until my answers stopped sounding nervous. I had a reference from Gerald, my freight company manager, one of the few good things I'd kept from that period. I had a cover letter I rewrote 8 times. I told my parents I was interviewing with a consulting firm and making progress. I kept the specifics to myself. The reason I kept the specifics to myself was not complicated. I knew the nod. My mother had a particular expression she used when I told her about things I was working toward. Warm, genuine, slightly removed, like a forecast for someone else's weather. It was the expression of someone who had learned to be cautiously supportive of a person whose track record was variable. I had seen that nod enough times that I had stopped wanting to give it things to react to. I got through the first interview, then the second, then the third, which was a formal panel. When I came home that evening, my mother was at the kitchen table with her reading glasses on. I sat across from her and I said, "I got through to the final round." She looked up. "What final round?" "Summit Group, the consulting firm. The final interview is next Saturday, 10 in the morning." She looked at something behind her eyes. That's Chelsea's birthday brunch. The birthday brunch had been planned for 6 weeks. A restaurant called Oliveira's, white tablecloths, 12 people, a reservation my mother had confirmed twice. I know, I said. I'll work it out. Okay, she said, and turned back to her book. That night I went to my room and I looked at the summit confirmation email for the 4th time since receiving it. Final round, Saturday, 10 a.m., the name of the interviewer, who was flying in from Chicago. The address, a number to contact if I needed to reschedule. I did not need to reschedule. I had already calculated, leave by 8:30, interview from 10 to noon, arrive at the restaurant by 12:15, after the brunch started but within acceptable. I would explain to Chelsea beforehand. Chelsea would understand. Chelsea always understood things that were clearly logical. I wrote the summit contact number on a notepad and left it on the kitchen counter, the way I left everything I needed to remember. My father had confirmed I could take the second car that Saturday. He had the other one. I confirmed it again that week. He said yes. I thought it was handled. The Saturday came with a specific quality of alertness in the air that turned out to be just my own nerves wearing the shape of the morning. I was up at 7. I showered, made coffee, went through my notes one more time. I had breakfast standing at the kitchen counter, which is what I do when I'm focused on something. At 8:15, I went to get the car keys from the hook by the back door. The hook was empty. My father was in the living room with the newspaper. I asked him about the keys. He lowered the paper with the expression of someone who has remembered something he was hoping not to say. "Your mother needed the car this morning," he said. "She had a pickup for the brunch, centerpiece from the florist. I thought she'd be back by now." "Dad?" I looked at him. "I have an interview in less than 2 hours." I know. He set the paper down. "Can you get a ride share?" "It's not that far." The ride share was $42 each way, which was not nothing for someone on a part-time salary managing money carefully. I called one anyway. The driver was 7 minutes late. I sat on the front steps watching the dot move on the map and doing something that was adjacent to breathing exercises. The route had unexpected construction on 71. 12 extra minutes, the driver said, apologetically. Nothing to be done. I arrived at Summit Group at 10:27. The woman at the front desk had prepared her expression in advance. Careful, kind, already sorry. "Miss Calhoun." She looked at her screen. "I'm so sorry. We were notified this morning that you'd be withdrawing from consideration. The interviewer has moved on to the next candidate." "I didn't withdraw," I said. "I'm not withdrawing." She looked at her screen again. There was clearly a note. "Let me get someone from HR." The HR coordinator was a woman about my mother's age. She pulled up the record on her computer. A call had come in that morning from a woman who identified herself as calling on my behalf. The caller had stated I would be withdrawing my application, effective immediately. The interviewer's slot had been given to the next candidate. They were sorry. These things happened with family situations. "It wasn't a family situation," I said. "I don't know who called." She looked at me carefully, weighing something. Then she said she was sorry again. I walked out of that building and stood on the sidewalk, a woman calling on my behalf. I tried to find an explanation that fit without going where the facts were pointing. A miscommunication. A mistake. Someone had misunderstood. These were the available options, and I arranged them in order, and then I put them aside, because there was another option with a face I recognized. I did not let myself think it all the way through. The history was easier. I had been late. I had been late to things before. The record said, "Zoey is late." The record said, "Zoey has things that don't quite work out." The record said this so consistently and with so much supporting evidence that it made the other explanation unnecessary. So I filed the other explanation somewhere deep, under things I did not know how to think about yet. I called a rideshare back. I changed out of my interview clothes. I got in the family car, back from the florist, keys on the hook, centerpiece in the trunk, and I drove to Oliveira's. The brunch was lovely, in the most technically accurate sense: white tablecloths, small candles even at noon, Chelsea in a yellow dress at the center of the table, laughing at something her boyfriend had said. 12 people, wine glasses, the warmth of a celebration going right. I sat beside my Aunt Patricia, and I ordered the eggs. Benedict and I smiled at Chelsea when she looked across the table, and she smiled back. At some point, she stood up and gave a small speech about gratitude that was genuine and slightly embarrassing and entirely her. Everyone applauded. My mother appeared at my elbow sometime during the entrees. "How did it go?" "Fine," I said. She patted my shoulder and went to speak to someone at the other end of the table. That was the whole conversation. I would not understand until 10 years later that she had already known how it went before she asked. I sent a follow-up email to Summit that evening. Another one 3 days later. A brief response came. The position had been filled. I did not apply to Summit again. I told myself the moment had passed, which was true. I told myself I'd arrived too late, which was technically true. The part about the woman who had called on my behalf, I stored it somewhere I couldn't locate on purpose. Some things you put in files that are hard to find. What I did instead was continue. The part-time job at the software company became full-time. I was good at the data work in a quiet and consistent way that accumulated over time into something management could see. I started noticing inefficiencies that were outside my official scope, mentioned one of them carefully in a meeting, and watched the department manager look at me for a moment like something had changed in his calculation. 3 months later, I was in a different role. 6 months after that, another. The salary went up in increments that felt small each time and significant in total. I moved out of my parents' house 14 months later. It took careful management of every dollar, declining social things that cost money, eating at home far more than I wanted to. When I signed the lease on my apartment in Columbus and stood in the empty living room alone for the first time, there was a feeling I didn't have a word for. Later, I understood the word was mine. The years between that apartment and the TerraLink director role were not a story of smooth upward progress. I want to be specific about that. There was a stretch, about 2 years after I moved out, when a project I was managing ran significantly over timeline, and I handled the fallout in a way that cost me a promotion I'd been working toward for 18 months. There was a professional conflict that damaged a working relationship badly enough that I spent 6 months carefully and quietly repairing it. There were periods when the forward direction was not visible from inside, and I had to operate on the faith that it was there, which is a different and harder thing than seeing it. I made it to a larger logistics company, then a regional firm, then, 4 years ago, to TerraLink. There was a period, maybe 6 months before I got to TerraLink, when I was seriously considering whether operations was the right field at all. I was between jobs, my savings were running lower than I was comfortable with, and I had a week where I applied to 3 positions outside the industry and then sat with those applications and felt nothing, which told me something. I didn't take any of them. I waited 2 more months and the TerraLink posting came up and something in me recognized it. That's the closest I can come to explaining it. I applied. I got the interviews. I got the job. The director role came 18 months after that. When it was offered, I said yes immediately, then went to the parking lot and sat in my car for a while. Then I called my mother. She said, "We always knew you had it in you." I said thank you, and I believed her and I didn't, both at the same time, and I couldn't explain the gap. The word always was doing a lot of work in that sentence. The always included October. It included the follow-up emails to Summit that got one polite non-response. It included every year between then and now, when nobody in my family seemed to have a clear theory of where I was going. I had learned to let the word pass without examining it. Chelsea, in those years, was doing what Chelsea did, correctly. She was a regional operations manager at a distribution company, had been there 5 years. She had a partner, a good apartment, a Saturday running route, labeled shelves in her refrigerator that I found slightly excessive and she found sensible. My parents talked about us in the way parents talk about their children when they have decided who each one is. Chelsea is settled. Zoey is finally figuring it out. The finally did a lot of work too. When Chelsea's company announced its restructuring, a Wednesday, 18 months ago, she called me that evening. Not our parents, me. I noticed she called me first. "They're eliminating my entire division," she said. Her voice was controlled in the way she controlled things. "I have 3 months of severance. The market at my level is bad right now." She paused, reorganized. "I wanted to ask you something." "Okay. TerraLink. Do you have anything at the coordinator level that would fit?" I was quiet for a moment. Not because I was calculating something strategic, because of the weight of the question. Chelsea Calhoun asking me for help, specifically in the field where I had spent the last decade building what I'd built. "I'll check in the morning," I said. There was a logistics coordinator opening, reporting to my department. I looked at it for a long time before I sent her the description. "Apply through the system," I told her. "I'll put in a word, but I won't override the process." She applied. She was more than qualified. She started 6 weeks later. Chelsea's first month was unremarkable in every measurable way, which made it remarkable. She arrived on time. She asked good questions. She learned the systems efficiently without making her efficiency visible in the way that reads as performance. She did not lean on our relationship, and I did not offer it. We had both, without discussing it, decided to keep the sister and manager thing in 2 separate drawers. My second in command, Marcus, who had been at TerraLink 9 years and whose read on new hires I trusted almost completely, told me at the end of her first month, "Your coordinator is solid, good instincts. Doesn't panic." "She never panics," I said. He nodded like that was a compliment. It was. There was one afternoon about 6 weeks in, a Thursday, end of day, when I was walking out and Chelsea was still at her desk, the last one in the bullpen. She was working through something on her screen with the focus she brought to hard problems. Total quiet, nothing else existing. It was familiar to me in a way I hadn't expected. I had seen that expression on her face in childhood, during the toy shelf assembly, during tests, during anything she decided to take seriously. It was her real face, underneath the organized reliability that everyone saw. There was something in it that was not unlike my own face when I worked through things alone. We had more in common than the family narrative had ever accounted for. I wasn't sure what to do with that. Then came the Sunday phone call. I spoke with my mother most Sundays, a habit from when I first moved out that had persisted through the years with varying degrees of engagement. She'd talk about the neighborhood, relatives, whatever was occupying her. I'd listen and sometimes drift into the spreadsheet I was reviewing on my laptop. This Sunday we were talking about Thanksgiving, host logistics, menu, whether our cousin Derek was still bringing the woman he'd been seeing. And then my mother said, in the same practical tone she used for everything practical, "It's funny, Chelsea, working for you now. Reminds me of when I called that company for you." "Summit, was it?" I stopped. "What did you say?" "Summit Group." Her voice had the mildness of someone who doesn't realize they've stepped onto something. "That consulting firm." "When you had the final interview." A brief pause. "I called them that morning, to let them know you wouldn't be making it." I closed the laptop. "Mom, I kept my voice level." "What do you mean, you called them?" "Well, you needed to be at Chelsea's brunch, and with the car situation, you were going to be late anyway." She searched for the shape of her own logic and found it, intact, still sound to her. I didn't want them sitting there waiting. And honestly, Zoey, you'd had so many things not work out. I thought it would spare you another disappointment. What did you tell them? I said you were withdrawing your application. The apartment went very quiet. You told them I was withdrawing. I called the number on the notepad, the one you'd left on the counter. She said it simply, the same way she might say, "I called to confirm the reservation," or "I called to cancel the appointment." The woman in HR was understanding about it. The notepad on the counter. The contact number I had written for myself in my own handwriting, the organizational habit I'd had since I was a teenager. The number I had left on the kitchen counter because it was my house, and I lived there, and I had not considered that this was information that could be used. The HR coordinator at Summit, a woman who identified herself as calling on your behalf. That was what she had said. I had stored it in a file I couldn't open. I had stored it there because the other explanation, the one with my mother's face, had not felt possible, and because the easier explanation fit the record perfectly, and because fitting the record was something I had done every time something went wrong for so long that I had stopped questioning whether the record was the whole story. I sat in my kitchen and I watched 10 years rearrange themselves. The 4 months of preparation she hadn't known about, because I'd protected it from her. The practice interviews, 11 rounds, Gerald's reference. The cover letter I'd rewritten 8 times, none of it visible to her, because I had kept it quiet, because I had already predicted the nod, and the nod would have made the work feel smaller. She had made her calculation with incomplete information. She had looked at what she could see, my history, my pattern, the record, and she had done what she thought was right, which was remove the friction she could remove so that Chelsea's day could go smoothly. "Mom," I said, "you canceled my job interview. You were going to be late. I know I was going to be late. I was working on it. That was mine to manage. I was trying to spare you. From trying? From possibly getting the job?" Something underneath the evenness was not even. You looked at everything you knew about me, and you decided the answer before I got to ask the question. That's not what. It is exactly what it was. I stopped, took a breath. I know you didn't mean it as harm. I believe you completely. But what it was, regardless of what you meant, was a decision that my attempt wasn't worth the inconvenience. Silence on her end. "I didn't know you had been preparing," she said, quietly. "I know you didn't." I paused. "I kept it from you. I kept it from you because I already knew what your face would do, and I didn't want to see that face again before I had a result to show you. So I kept it quiet, and because I kept it quiet, you had no information that told you this time was different. I know that. I let that sit. It still doesn't change what you did. I made a mistake," she said. The words came slowly. "I understand that now. I know you didn't see it as one at the time," I said. "That's the part I'm going to have to carry." We didn't talk long after that. I told her I needed some time. She said she understood. I think she did, partially. I drove to Terralink the next morning. I parked in my spot, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, walked into the open plan space. Chelsea was at her desk, earbuds in one ear, coffee to her right, working through something on her screen. She looked up when I came in, raised her hand in a small wave. I raised mine back. I went to my office, sat down, pulled up my calendar, which was full of things that needed doing. After a moment, I started doing them. My mother always said I'd figure it out eventually. The word eventually is doing a lot of work in that sentence. It says the figuring is going to happen, that part she was right about, but it also says it's not happening now, not yet, give it time. It puts the destination in the future and leaves the current person behind, waiting to catch up to themselves. I did figure it out. That's true. But figuring it out had a cost the sentence doesn't account for, the cost of building something from the bottom of the wrong assumption instead of from a different starting line. I don't say this to claim a tragedy. I don't have one. I built what I built, and I built it with things that were mine to build with. The wrong turns, the real mistakes, the actual learning that came from failing and continuing anyway. I'm not sure the Summit version of my life would have produced what this version produced. I'm honestly not sure. What I know is that I was ready to try, and trying was mine to do. Chelsea is still at Terralink. She moved past the uncertain early months into something that reads on her like earned competence, different from her old competence, more tested. She had built her previous life correctly, and the floor had moved anyway, and now she was learning what I'd been learning for years, that the floor moves and you adjust, and what matters is the adjusting. We had lunch last month, Just the two of us, off the clock. We talked about something other than work. She asked me something personal and I answered honestly, and there was a moment that shifted between us, something that hadn't been there before, or that had been there but hadn't been available. We're learning a new version of what we are to each other. I don't know what it looks like finished. I'm not sure it finishes. I haven't spoken much to my mother in the weeks since the Sunday call. We've texted logistics, family things, the ordinary maintenance of something that's suspended in a space that isn't quite repair yet. We'll find our way back. Families usually do, and I think we are a family that will. The parking spot still has my name on it. It still feels slightly absurd. Most mornings I walk past without slowing, but some mornings, maybe once a week, maybe less, I stop for a second and read it. Zoey Calhoun, Director of Operations. Then I go inside. There's work to do, and it's mine, and I built it. That's enough. That's actually quite a lot.